start again. It is my pleasure to keep the conversation rolling and to bring on Keisha Ellis, who's going to talk about the Future Democracy Conference and realities of minimum wage. There is no minimum wage. Yeah, you can hire somebody and pay them to not work, and they can not be part-time and not be full-time, which is a very interesting concept. So welcome, Keisha. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. So the title of this presentation is inaccurate. I'm not going to be talking about the realities of minimum wage because that would be about a 45-second presentation where I say it's not enough money in any way, shape, or form in any imaginary world, right? So we would just be done with that, and I don't think anyone would be surprised. All right, so I'm going to mention minimum wage. We're going to be talking about some other things, but we are going to talk, I think, about reality a bit. All right, I'd like to say, Nantino, shout out to you. I think that there are a lot of similarities between what you spoke about and what I'm going to try to address as well. And like Nantino, I had a really hard time finding the thread, right? Okay, what is it actually going to be about? I think I found something, and we'll just carry on with that and see what we actually come up with. All right, we are going to start with a musical interlude. All right. I think the sound is up. All right, you know that song? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let's listen to it again. All right. And then I found this beautiful meme about this song, right? My life is like Rihanna's song. All I do is work, 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 and the rest of it I don't understand. All right. So that was a litmus test. That was a litmus test, right? I'm like, if they laugh, they are going to understand the rest of this presentation. Okay, because I actually got a bit afraid because I realized that I'm in a room of people whose connection to work might not be representative of most of the world, right? I'm in a room of academics and activists and retirees and students and people whose labor might not be commodified in the same way as the majority of the world. But you laughed at that, so you get it. All right, you understand what we're talking about. Okay. So let's talk about work, the concept of work. All right, and we'll take it way back, Aristotle, who was in about 300 BCE. And what Aristotle thought was that work was only necessary in order to sustain life. Pretty straightforward, nothing groundbreaking here, right? So we do enough work so that we can continue living, right? And the actual point of life was to enjoy it, get a little bit of leisure time. What we're not going to talk about was the fact that Aristotle, of course, meant this for a very specific group of people, not all people, right? But we are allowed to take useful things and use them how we need to, right? So this is what Aristotle thought. Right? And what was this usefulness? What were you supposed to do with leisure, right? You were supposed to be thinking and writing and creating and enjoying art, right? And importantly, engaging in politics, right? That was a part of your leisure. That was part of what it meant to be a human, right? A full person, right? Which made me think that, okay, so what we're talking about is a universal right to leisure, which I don't hear enough about. I've heard people say that there's a right to work, all right, but where is the right to leisure, and why aren't we even thinking about this as something that we might actually want, right? And the right to leisure is actually tied to the universal right of freedom, right? Because what you being free for if you can't use your time the way you want it, right? He also critiqued the pursuit of wealth for its own sake. He was like, when you're not working to generate wealth, you're working so that you can have time, right? You sweeping the floor now, so later on when the sun's shining, right, you could go to the beach, right? That was his idea of it, right? And if we take his point, and we love to talk about Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, right? So don't pretend like he ain't making no sense now, right? But if we agree that, engaging in politics was important and you need leisure in order to engage in politics, how are we talking about a democracy if people don't have no free time to actually engage in the democratic process in a meaningful way? All right? So now let's talk about John Locke, right? And again, I picked political philosophers that even people who disagree with me can't really say anything about, right? Because these are the founders. These are the people upon whom this Western civilization is built, right? So John Locke, he lived and wrote in around 1632. Well, he was born in 1632, died in 1704, right? So we're talking really classical philosophies here, right? And John Locke, for those who don't know, his philosophies were, foundational to things like the American Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and all of these things, right? So this is what Locke thought about work. He thought that labor was the source of property, right? And this is the labor theory of property. What does this mean? This means that your labor creates wealth. That is how you come to own things, by working, right? And you can see this in cowboy movies, Western movies, right? You hitch up a caravan, you find some open space, you claim this open space, but you start working the land, right? And through working the land, you acquire the wealth of it, right? You see an apple tree, you pick the apple, that is your labor, that is now your apple, right? So we work in order to create wealth for ourselves, right? And so he also thought that work was a duty, right? God has given you this land, right? God has given man domain over this land, and now it's your duty to put in the work so that you can conquer the land. Okay, so Aristotle, John Locke, obviously two very differing views to the approach to work, right? So where are we today, right? I would argue that the world we exist in today is a world where work is the only option, right? My son asked me a couple weeks ago, well, mommy, if humans so smart, why are we the only animals who have to pay to live? Right? That's the question. Exactly. So, so if work is not leading to leisure, like how Aristotle said, right, and it's not leading to wealth, what are we doing? Why? Why are we doing it? Right? But before we get into the why we're doing it, right, we have to go back just a little bit again and talk about the introduction of the factory, right? And of course, Karl Marx, who wrote Das Kapital in 1867, right? And in this seminal work, Marx outlined the labor theory of value, okay? So remember, Locke talked about the labor theory of wealth, which is you work, you collect wealth, very simple, the end, right? But with the introduction of the factory, or the growth of the factory, right, Marx saw something different happening, right? What he saw was that you had workers who would take these raw materials, right? They would take some leather and thread, right? So you give a worker leather and thread, and they produce shoes. The shoes are worth more than the leather and thread individually, right? And so now you have this more valuable product, right? And who created that value? Who created the value for that new product? The worker, right? The person who did it, they created that value, right? But this worker doesn't own the factory. The owner owns the factory, right? And now we get to something that we all understand, right? You take some more raw materials, You let a worker do something to it, either sell it or polish it or design it or create it, right? And then you sell that thing, right? The money you make from selling it, do you give the person who created that value the full value that they created? Of course not, right? If I sell a pair of shoes for $25, my commission is not $25 because that would be absurd. The owner would not make any profit, right? And we all kind of understand that that is the point of having a business, right? Making profit, right? But the way Marx outlined it is that you have the added value, the value that I created, right? Minus what you pay me, right? And that difference is the profit. We all understand profit. But Marx said that profit equals exploitation. That's what it is. You are benefiting off of what you have not given me. Off of the amount by which you can exploit me, that is where your profit lies. Okay? So, if we take, and again, we get it, right? Your boss can't pay you exactly how much money you make for him, because otherwise, how he can buy his Mercedes, right? It just does not work that way, and we understand that. So, if wealth is actually generated through the labor of other people, through the exploitation of labor, right, then I think it's a very simple and basic claim to say that anyone working 8 hours a day should earn enough from that job for a basic standard of living. All right? I mean, I think that should just be the bottom line, right? When we talk about minimum wage, it should not be about what people can afford, right? It should be about, okay, I am generating wealth through exploiting you. The least I can give you in return is a basic standard of living. I do not think that's revolutionary, right? And if you cannot afford to still reap a profit, if you pay me enough to have a basic standard of living, then you cannot afford to own this business. To me, that's just basic, right? So let's talk about minimum wage. This is the 45 seconds on minimum wage, all right? So minimum wage is $260 a week. It used to be $200 for a long time, then it was increased to $250, and then $260. Now, this statistic, 1/3 of workers in the Bahamas make minimum wage. I mean, like Dr. Bethel Bennett said, that actually means nothing, right? Because that is not taking into account all of the workers who are undocumented, all right? If you can get away with paying your workers less than this, you will, all right? So this is a statistic that exists. It actually does not mean much, all right? It does not actually kind of illustrate reality in any real way or in any actual way, but it is what it is, right? So if we have 260 times 4, that's about $1,000 a month, right? I am eternally grateful for Leslie Archer and her recent study on the middle class. And I'm grateful to her because she did a lot of calculations and research that I just did not feel like doing, all right? I did not feel like trying to figure out, okay, what is the cheapest acceptable place a person can be charged rent to live in? I wasn't interested in looking that up. I'm very grateful to Dr. Archer for doing that for me. What is the lowest quality of food that a person can buy that can still be classified as food? And how do we then calculate that, right? I don't have the stomach for it, right? So I'm very grateful, and this is why research is important. So I'm very grateful to Dr. Archer for calculating this. And what she said is that for a family of 4, we're looking at $5,000 a month, right, for a basic standard of living. Okay, we are all very smart people. I don't have to tell you that $1,000 a month, even $2,000, if it's 2 minimum wage earners in the house, $2,000 is less than $5,000. Okay? We got it? All right. So minimum wage does not adequately cover even the lowest level of a basic standard of living. Okay? So I'm going to give you just a little bit of a perspective from what I've seen at Hands for Hunger. So for those who don't know, Hands for Hunger is a food bank in the Bahamas, right? Very simple. We give out food to people who tell us that they cannot afford food on their own. Very simple, right? And we've been able to collect some data over the 4 years our pantry has been open, right? So 4 years ago, we opened a family pantry where families can come to us directly and say, we need some food, right? We've registered almost 8,000 people in our pantry program in the 4 years that we've been in existence, all right? Okay, and here's some graphs and charts. So what are we looking at? This is the employment status of the people who have come to Hands for Hunger for food. We have 20% of them who work full-time. That don't make no sense to me, but we have 20% of them. So full-time people, right, are saying to us, I can't afford food, right? We have 20% of them that work part-time, right? So unemployment, not very surprising, is the largest amount of people, right? But what I want to draw your attention to is, and I've color-coded the kinds of unemployment. So we have the recently unemployed, which is by a slight margin the biggest part of that bar right there, right? So there are, of the unemployed people, well, of all the people, 13% of the people who come to us are recently unemployed, right? And the reason why I highlight them is because these are people who've been unemployed for less than 6 months. I put that out here because, I mean, there, but for the grace of God go we, right? They used to work, now they ain't working. Could be almost anyone, right? It was most of us during COVID, right? So, I mean, in my estimation, I mean, I would prefer to put the recently unemployed in the same category as the fully employed people, right? I didn't, right? But to me, if we look at this in the actual way things lay out in life, right? Recently unemployed and full-time workers, we really should be considering ourselves in the same boat, right? And I have to say, just for transparency, 1,000%, I mean, 1,000 people did not give us this information, right? So I'm just letting you know that, and that's over the course of our 4 years, right? And just because I think y'all are curious, I also have a chart on the level of education, right? So just in case you're curious, almost 80% of our clients did graduate high school. For what that's worth, I don't really have any insights into that. I do, but I've left them out of this presentation, all right? And 5% of them went to college, which I think is interesting, all right? So there's something going on here where the markers that we have for success, right, and assuming being able to provide food for yourself and your family is a marker of success, right? The paths by which we expect to get there perhaps don't always line up, okay? So here's what I'm trying to say. Tomato, tomato. I love visually displaying this joke because it just doesn't fly. I love it, right? But tomato, tomato, right? Working class, middle class. It just is what it is, right? It just is what it is. This idea of the middle class is whatever you want it to be, right? Whatever you want it to be, right? But if we're talking about the people who I think, and anyone who you imagine to be middle class, I am arguing that whoever that person is, they are probably more likely working class. And here's why I say this. If you cannot maintain your lifestyle without your paycheck, you are working class. That's just what it is, right? If you lose your job and then you can no longer pay your bills, you are working class by definition, all right? So let's get some more theory into this. So I'm going to look at Byung-Chul Han, who is a Korean-German political philosopher, right? And in 2010, he wrote the book called The Burnout Society, right? And in The Burnout Society, he talks about what he calls the Achievement Society, All right, so what he's saying is that we actually do live in a meritocracy. In case you didn't know, this is actually a meritocracy, right? And because we all see it as a meritocracy, we know that, oh, we have to work as hard. We have to work as hard as possible so that we deserve whatever it is we think we deserve, right? Nothing is just given to you by virtue of you existing. What do you think this is? No, this is all on merit. So if you don't deserve it, you don't get it, right? And what he said that this leads to, and this is an internalized belief, right? We believe this in and of ourselves, and we teach it to our children, right? And what this leads to is now auto-exploitation, right? It's internalized through a paradigm shift from external domination to this self-generated compulsion to keep doing, to keep earning, to keep monetizing yourself, right? So it's not only more efficient for capitalism, but it's disguised as freedom, right? Because you choosing to do it, you want to do it. You want to do this, right? No one is making you do it. You want this, right? So you have this, what he describes as the free constraint of maximizing achievement. The only thing stopping you is you. The only reason why you're not making it is because of your own lack of will. This is the power of can. You could make $1 million, you're just not working hard enough. You don't want it bad enough. All right? Exactly. We all have the same hours in the day. What are you doing with yours? You wake up at 5 a.m., I wake up at 4. Do you know how much I get done before 6 a.m.? It's this idea, right? And it's internal. It's internal. So the internalization of exploitation manifests as a psychic violence directed inward. The pressure is no longer to fulfill a duty to others, but to constantly outdo oneself. All right. It ain't me, it's him. Oh, I wish I could take credit. All right, so what do we have? We have people who are making 5, 6, 7 times more than minimum wage, still having this side hustle. It's not the American dream anymore. It's the influencer dream. It's the real estate dream. Side note, there are doctors who are taking the real estate license exam because they need to make more. They need to make more money, right? And of course, the startup dream. All right, so we've done a lot of thinking. Let's take a second to scroll. All right, meme break. My job is just stress. I'm basically being paid to be stressed. I got a lot of them because you can't look at one meme, man. You got to look at a series of memes. Right? When it's time to start a new work week. When people ask how I handle this job. You have a 40-hour work week? I remember my first part-time job. All I do is work and sleep, but I never have any money and I'm always tired. Me on my third emotional breakdown of the day. I don't get paid enough to deal with this, I'm out. Just kidding, I'm broke and have too many bills to pay. And one of my favorites by the great George Carlin, oh, you hate your job? Why didn't you say so? There's a support group for that. It's called Everybody, and we meet at the bar. Right? So good, I'm glad, and look, if you are a researcher and you are not looking at memes for information, you are missing out. Right? You are missing out. The memes are telling the story about our culture and our society in a way that, I mean, I don't think we've been able to do so efficiently and entertainingly as with a meme. So what are these memes describing? Burnout, anxiety, depression. It's a coincidence that it spells out bad I didn't realize that until I was reviewing, right? But burnout, anxiety, depression, we get it, right? That was a series of memes about burnout, anxiety, and depression. All right. So back to the original question. If work is not allowing wealth or leisure, why do we keep doing it? And according to Han, why are we doing even more of it? Okay, so to talk about that, we can talk about the work of Mark Fisher and his book Capitalist Realism, which was published in 2009, right? And so what Mark Fisher, the entire idea of capitalist realism is this: it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. All right, and we can see it because every end of the world movie there's something to do with capitalism in there, right? So what is capitalist realism? Widespread belief that capitalism is the only viable political and economic system, and that imagining a coherent alternative has become nearly impossible, right? And so it is, when I the first day of class with my students, right? So I teach political economy in the Bahamas. I always tell them that we have a very difficult job ahead of us because we're going to spend the semester like fish trying to describe water. It's going to be very difficult, right? We are trying to talk about just the atmosphere in which we exist. And it's not an easy thing to do. And that's what happens when we try to critique capitalism. You're like, but you're just critiquing what is. What are you even talking about? That's just the way it is. And so it's very difficult to get a coherent conversation going when people are like, okay, what's next? Gravity? You mad at gravity now, Keisha? Right? But the thing is, though, it is not, right? Capitalism is not gravity. Capitalism is a construct, right? But it's a very, it's a very dominant one. A very dominant one, right? So it's not just an ideology, it's an atmosphere, something that conditions culture, work, education, and even our desires. That's what capitalism does. It survives by absorbing and commodifying everything, even anti-capitalism, even our hopes and dreams. And again, we are fish describing water. We're like, yeah, that's what you do. Right, so you know, you want to have an anti-capitalist message, or you can put that on a T-shirt and then sell it on Amazon. All right, so this capitalism makes space for critique within it, which makes it very difficult to. I don't want to say that it makes it difficult to actually critique it. Right? You can still critique it, but it makes it difficult to dismantle it via the critique, right? And even, of course, our hopes and dreams. Because what do we tell our babies, right? When we see that, boy, your son can be a little bit tall, right? Or a little athletic, right? Basketball, right? Your child's smart, or you can be a lawyer. Right? We as soon as we can, we start commodifying even our children. I should explain what I mean by commodify, right? To turn into a commodity, to turn into a product, to turn into something that can be packaged and sold. Right? So as soon as we can, we find what about our children can we commodify? Right? What about ourselves can I commodify? Right? And we do this because we care about our children. We don't do this because we don't like our children and want them to fail. We do this because we love our children so much that we want them to be able to exist successfully in this capitalist world. There is no alternative. All right? And then there's also the pre-corporation, which is a phrase I really like. Right? So it's not incorporation, it's pre-corporation, where capitalism can anticipate and commodify subcultures and alternatives before they can truly threaten it. Right? So are you an artist? Right? Are you a singer? Right? The best way for you to get your art into the world is to try and get a record label. All right? Are you a book publisher? All right? If you want to spread that message, you may think that the only way you can do it is through a huge publisher, right? Which then absorbs you into the machinery, and you just become a part of it. Just become like a bolt or a screw in this machine. And it's also the colonization of the unconscious, right? For younger generations, it just is. Capitalism won. What are you talking about? And you especially hear it now. Any critique of capitalism instantly turns into, a connection with dictatorships or wars or famines, right? There's no space for any conversation. Now, I promise you, capitalism has had just as much famines, just as many dictators, right? Just as much genocide, more so in actuality, right, than socialist regimes, but doesn't matter, right? It has completely taken control of the narrative, right? And so that leads to this reflexive impotence. I know things are bad, but life just hard. Life just hard, that's what it is. So anything outside of capitalism is presented as unrealistic, utopian, or dangerous. So what this also leads to, right? Okay, so where are we? We working too much, not getting any free time or money from it, right? We working really hard. We're working as much as possible, right? For this system that we don't even believe is good. We just believe is our only choice, right? So what does this do? It causes the things that I put on the slide, burnout, anxiety, and stress. Right, but what does capitalism do? In its brilliance, it privatizes the stress. Right, so that burnout that Han described, that he saw actually as inevitable, right, would in actuality be the thing that people need to be like, oh, screw this, I ain't doing this no more, right? But what we do now is we privatize that stress. This stress is not because of the entire social fabric in which I exist. The stress is mine. Because I'm not sticking to my schedule. The stress is mine because I cannot wake up at 4. If I woke up at 4, maybe I would have 5 minutes to myself, so then I wouldn't feel stressful for the rest of the day, right? It is your fault. It's your hormones. Have you tried medication? Because obviously there's something going on with you that's wrong, right? So it's not a social issue that we should deal with. It's all you. Figure it out. Right? Take a mental health day, come back, you'll be fine. You need to do what you need to do to sort yourself out, because obviously it's not the rest of us. It's not this system. Right? So, right, Karl Marx thought for sure that by this point, he's gonna have a socialist revolution. He honestly was like, okay, if he could probably, I'm putting words in his mouth, but if he could describe a social situation in which the workers would get fed up, and workers could talk to each other through the internet and memes and really understood what each people was saying. If Karl Marx could imagine a world where people would sit down and watch the video about cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or a housing crisis in Texas, he would say, well, surely that would be it, right? Workers of the world unite? Of course. No. Nah, right? And why, right? We can all look at these memes and all instantly relate to them, yet we are not trying to unite and break the shackles of exploitation, right? And why aren't we doing this? And I argue, in addition to Wendy Brown, that what we have is class resentment. What we have is useless phrases like middle class that allows us to differentiate ourselves from other people, right? And also have something to aspire to, upper class. And we're almost there, right? Because I'm actually upper middle class. I'm actually upper middle class. So the next stop is lower upper class, right? And then I'm almost there. right? And again, if connected to this is this achievement society idea that I am here because I have worked so hard, right? What do you say about the people who aren't on your level? You're not working hard enough. It's your fault. I wake up at 4 a.m. Have you tried that? Right? And so, and then we also consider ourselves as a part of the upper class potentially, right? And again, upper class, I don't care. If you work for your paycheck, you are still working class. Remember that. I do not care how big that paycheck is. If you lose it and you can no longer afford your house, you are working class, right? And if we all understood this, then maybe we would say, well, hold on, maybe the situation isn't right, right? But we've chopped it all up, categorized it differently, right? That just allows us to continue fighting against each other so that we can carve out the space that we need to achieve what it is we want to achieve or what we think we deserve, right? And also because of the self-exploitation, which I talked about in relation to that, right? And then also the privatization of stress. Oh, you can't cut it. That's it. You're just weak. You can't cut it. Have you tried going for a walk? No, because I have no free time. Okay. All right, we'll try medication then. All right? What you actually need to do is eat a diet of whole grains, whole foods, right? Organic beef, right? Which I'm making fun of it, but yes, we probably all should be eating like that. But with what money and with what time? Right? Exactly. You could try a meditation app, right? So what this does not leave any space for is empathy and solidarity. I do not feel sorry for you if you can't feed your children because you are not trying hard enough. Why don't you just go get a job? Why don't you just go get a job, likely minimum wage that we've already determined will not actually cover the minimum standard of living. Right, one more time. We have the answer this time. All right? Y'all can give me the answer right now. If you are working and still cannot afford food, why are you working? Jail? That might be it. Then now you can see why prisons are such an effective tool of the market, right? For that very reason. So if survival depends entirely on contributing to the market, then does society exist solely to maintain the market? Right? It's a rhetorical question. They're both, unfortunately, rhetorical questions, and that's what I call questions that I don't know the answer to. I make it seem like it's deliberate, right? But I don't have an answer to this, right? But it does make me think something, and it makes me think that this is not a benign thing we are working with. This is malicious. It holds our consciousness, our life, and the lives of our children literally hostage. It requires us to feed it our creativity and even humanity, or else perish. This is not hyperbole, because if you don't go to work, you cannot feed your children. That is a real thing, right? And if there's something special about you, you would be a fool not to try and commodify that as quickly as possible, right? So that you can carve out a certain surety for your children. Right? This is the world that we're living in, right? And one of my favorite is not the right word. One of the most interesting things I find about existing in this like late stage capitalism is how it shows our capability for cognitive dissonance. All right? How we can feel one thing and see one thing, but also still think and say another thing. Like, if you work hard, you make money. Right? Because if I said to you right now, yeah, so I'm gonna try get 2 more shifts tonight, right? And that's for my first job, and I also just got another part-time job. right? I'm working a lot, but you ain't gonna look at me and be like, boy, you must be rich, right? You must be rich. No, because we know that in actuality, the harder you work, the likelier that you do not make a lot of money, right? So we hold both those things in our head at the same time, right? We also hold this idea that society, that all human life has dignity, right? That of course life is special, but we also know at the same time that your life is dependent on how much money you have. People who have more money have more of an entitlement to life in our society. That's a fact, because we understand that if you can't afford medical treatment, then you die. You can't afford food, you starve. So we know that. We know that if you cannot afford to live, you die. But at the same time, we say, oh, yeah. All life equal. No one's better than anyone else, right? So I didn't give you, and I'm coming to the end, I did not give you any answers, but in all fairness, you did not give me any answers either. So I feel like we're even. But I do have one recommendation.
Realize it.
Look, you see what I mean? You see how the market just tries to absorb everything? Right? Exactly. So I do have one recommendation, and it's a good one. I stand by this one. We need to learn to rely on public services. Parks, healthcare, school, libraries, training opportunities, clubs, activities, all of these things, we need to use and rely on them. They have to become a part of how we exist in society. And why? There's a threefold result in this, right? Best one, you get to know your neighbors. That's the best one. Yeah. All right? Get to know the people who live on this small little island with you. That in and of itself would be revolutionary. Just that in itself is revolutionary. Then very practically, reduce your living expenses, right? So the Archer article talked about, what it means to be middle class. And what it means to be middle class was to have all of the trappings of middle class life, which was living in a certain area. And she had a map that just showed the north coast of the Bahamas, of Nassau. Right? So living in that area, sending your children to private schools, probably having some insurance, right? This is what makes you middle class, right? But if we relied on public services, right, then we could cut out a lot of those expenses, right? Now, y'all don't want to do that, and I don't blame you, right? Because of everything we just said. If you could afford to give your children better, you will try to give your children better. But when we all start using it, right, what it means is that we show the government that we can be using these things, right? So fix it. And Dr. Strawn actually brought this up at the end of the session last night, which is that, right? We have stripped them of the responsibility of making society something that we can flourish in, right? So if it's one thing, one common thread throughout this entire week is the government ain't gonna do nothing unless we make them. They just won't. Right? So until we start letting them know, no, I will be sending my children to government school, and they will be safe, and they will have a good education, then that's the prompt that they need to be like, oh, shoots, we got to do this for real now. Right? If I say, oh, no, I will be going to Carmichael Clinic for my annual, then they're like, oh, shoots. People using these things now. Right? And so it'll be the impetus that they need, right, to start actually making these things something that we can use, right? So that's one way I think that we could just perhaps start to strip away our dependence on the market, and then perhaps have a couple extra 5 to 10 minutes in the day to think about new realities and to imagine new things. Thank you.
Come up to the podium.
You can't leave. You're not allowed to leave. Watch all the cables
Yes.
that are designed to trip you down.
Yes.
So, as a good dictator and an orange person in the room, I let the rest of that go. And using the forces to dominate, train them in the local cities to dominate everybody. I think that the university is a really good park for this study because one of the things you mentioned is the way work is commodified. And our colleagues in this place have decided that we must be here from 9 to 5. Even when we are PhDs who are doing research, we should be doing that research on University of the Bahamas computers. So I want you to respond to that because University of the Bahamas computers, my dear chair, as you, sorry, I'm being evil, don't work.
Yeah,
Or they're older than my daughter.
yeah,
So now
So,
suffering with the students.
right.
but the students choose to suffer because they do not wish to speak up.
No, I chose to suffer until I realized I could drop out.
Right.
And still survive the scorn of my peers.
But
my parents.
so I was chastised by a student because we got the notification that we were going to be online at 8 or 9 that night. And I gave it to them at 10 to 10 in the morning, giving them the link for the class. And the student chastised me roundly. And I didn't realize that I worked 24 hours a day for your service.
But then, of course, you're supposed to show them that both
I did.
the faculty and the students are locked in oppression, right? That the administrators have been like that from
They
the
don't,
first time I dropped
they
out.
don't understand what oppression is.
Well, that's
So,
right.
no, but seriously, how do you combat that?
How do you combat that? I mean, I think that's what I was asking, but, but I mean, what you do is, I mean, I guess we just have to figure out, I don't want to put the responsibility on the individual in the same way that like we privatize stress, right? But at a certain point, right, if you think about the things that you can control, right, one thing you can control is yourself, right? And perhaps even one way to do it perhaps is to look at technology as a tool for yourself. Stop seeing yourself as a tool of technology, right? Which means that if someone sends me an email at 9:15 p.m., I have to answer it by 9:20 p.m. Otherwise, I have failed technology, right? So that might just be a shift. And I found that people realize that. Once people realize I don't answer WhatsApps, they stop sending them, right? So I don't know, right? So I don't know how that answers the questions of why on God's green earth they would expect professors to be on campus from 9 to 5. And I don't even understand the logic behind that, so it's difficult for me to respond to it in any meaningful way. But I'm sure they have a reason. I don't know, I can't think of what it is.
That was just to open the floor to all the questions because dictators really don't want to give up their hold on power ever.
Right.
The orange one.
The way to do it is to become radical, right? Like that's my whole experience here at the College of the Bahamas. I dropped out, I'll say it again, I dropped out 4 times. If they have me back, I'll drop out again because the learning is in the margins. But while I was here, that dynamic was prevalent, right? Margot Blackwell was a lecturer mentor when the rubber tree fell. And there was a whole campaign to save the rubber tree, to turn it into a feature that accommodated the existing culture of the students, but also beautified the space, right? But my whole time here, it's like the administration pits the faculty against the students, right?
And don't forget the staff. Don't forget the lowly staff
Right.
over there just
As-
getting rocks from everywhere.
It's a perfect example of plantation model academics, right? But the way to do it though is you have to call out the administration. So you say to the students, you have to say it publicly in a memo, right? I apologize for sending this to you at this time. I got it last night after my working hours, and I sure you didn't want to hear anything from me after your working hours, and so we are both subject to this type of treatment, right? But then the political class comes into play, right? And then these guys start talking and they hog up the space. But you have to go at it. You have to go at it directly.
I hope someone's watching the time, because I feel like.
Yeah. You got it.
Oh.
You got it. 10 minutes.
Thank you, Keisha. I remember when this presentation was funny. That was nice. I thought your point about getting to know your neighbors is really cute, because I actually don't think people want to know their neighbors. And I think that one of the unanswerable questions, there's something appealing about competition and creating difference, which connects to what Martina was talking about, right? And the sort of very an abusive relationship that we have with capitalism and convincing ourselves that we can buy our way out of certain identities, or at least be able to conceal them, which will tell you some of the reasons that women have internalized misogyny and kind of use it, right? And weaponize it against LGBTQ plus people. And it's not because women are bad people. It's because we're using capitalism to try to function in a very unequal world. And I was very happy when empathy came up, because I was thinking about it, and I was going to come up and say, oh, of course, Keisha is going to come up. No empathy, no solidarity, but also there's no interest in struggle for liberation. It is seemingly easier to suffer in an unwinnable competition with moving goalposts. And I think we need to make a distinction between struggle, right? We talk about the struggle is real. It's the suffering that's real. And what we need to do is struggle together for liberation. And so my question for you, because I know you work at Hands for Hunger, y'all are doing really cool things. I love that you are not pushing people to prove their suffering to be able to get help. And I wonder how you're engaging with them otherwise, because I think that real engagement beyond providing the necessary for right now with people who are suffering and know the suffering in ways that some of us think we can buy our way out of, can give us a clue as to how we can get people to connect, to want to know each other and want to struggle together.
So I think that's a really good point, right? And I think what it is people like, I already struggling, right? So, and they think that for some reason that the struggle for freedom is going to be worse than the struggle you already do, right? Exactly. They think that the other side will be worse, right? But there's no evidence of that. The evidence might actually show that, no. The struggle that you are afraid of will actually be easier to endure than the suffering that's going on over there. And in terms of Hands for Hunger, what we do is, and I think it's interesting that you said that we don't try to make people perform their poverty for us, right? Which we don't. But what we find is that most of the clients, when they come, they feel like they have to, right? And it took us a long time to convince people that even if they said they were working, they would still get food, right? Because they thought, even though they were living it, they were living the situation where they were working and could not afford food, they thought it was so absurd that if they said that to us, there was no way we would actually give them food, right? Exactly. So it took a long time for people to realize that you don't have to lie from us. We know that you're calling from your job right now, right? We have call ID. But I mean, I think that's interesting as well. And you ask what else we're doing. We try to promote dignity, right? And so when people come to us for food, it's not, here's your generic food box, take it and go. Right? They can actually choose the items that they want, right? Oh, my children love apples. Can I take a couple more apples? My children actually hate tuna. Do I still have to take the tuna and force feed it to my children because they're poor? No, you don't have to do that, right? And what we hope, right, and what we've seen a little bit coming to the forefront is that, just a little bit of dignity kind of helps people realize that, being in a situation where you cannot currently afford food is not really representative of who we think you are as an entire person. All right. What we also do is post a lot of jobs in the pantry, right? So we have job listings all the time. And trust me, there are a lot of job listings. Wendy's always hiring. Wendy's is always hiring, right? But what we find is, what do they say to us? Okay, well, I mean, I could get this minimum wage job. I don't have a car, so I'll have to wake up 2 hours early to get on the bus. I can't work the late shift because the buses stop running at this time. And that means I'm going to have to find someone to watch my children during this time. right? Exactly, 4,260. You know, when you talk about a person who has dignity and has the capacity to make the best decisions for their children, for their family, you can understand how getting that job at Wendy's could be the worst possible choice they could make for their family. Yeah. I don't think I answered your question at all, but I said a lot of stuff. Okay.
Hi, Keisha, thank you so much for the presentation. It brought up so many different themes and ideas, but one that, well, two that popped to mind and a question. I don't know if you or anybody else has seen that progressive commercial where the progressive lady. It's trying to explain to like this black female entrepreneur what's a vacation, and like neither of them can like understand it, and then the progressive woman was like, oh well, I don't know because I've never actually had one either. And every single time the commercial comes on, I'm like, but you've been working at Progressive forever. You've never had a vacation. So it's just like so, right? Probably it's so insidious, right? Like it's packed into everything. But then it also brought up the idea, like one of the things that we did within the Endower project a few years ago actually was we restored our outdoor kitchen in Cat Island, right? And just like it kind of gave hope to this notion that like we do have recent memory of what community looks like, you know, and did that successfully, and so that there are ways that we could kind of go back to that or can call upon that. And then the last was that I noticed that you didn't really touch on religion, or and how that like, you know, if man don't work, he don't eat. By the sweat of your brow, you know, all of those notions, and just like how difficult it is to try and find like spaces or churches in which like the teamsiness of like believing in a higher power is promoted. So
yeah, John Locke is credited with kind of creating what became the Protestant work ethic, which is this idea that you have to toil on this earth. Right? You have to put in the work and sweat and tears. Very Little House on the Prairie, right? Yeah. Which is you have to eke out this existence. And maybe if you do, God will find you worthy to enter the kingdom of heaven. Right? You have to earn your way in through blood, sweat, and tears, right? But funny you should say that, because I actually had a whole series of slides that actually talked about this from a religious perspective. And I had a whole bunch of different religious thinkers and leaders across traditions that talked about how in actuality, right, you should be living with the earth, and the earth will provide. And look at the birds in the fields and the trees in the forest. Don't I provide for them? So in actuality, if we wanted to lean on religion, right, there are countless examples in religion that says that we actually should not be existing to contribute to the market in this way. But of course, as we do, we handpick what will be most useful in order for us to achieve the goals that we want to have. And they tend to be the ones like, yeah, you won't eat except for by the sweat of your brow, etc., etc. Yeah. And that also helps with tithing, right? Yeah. If you have a bunch of people who just, you know, eating mangoes off their tree, right? You don't want a bunch of mango in the collection plate. Right? You don't want mutton and snap in the collection plate. Right? You don't want a beaded necklace or a poem, right? You want actual money. So, I mean, that it makes more sense that you would highlight those passages of the Bible than other ones. Yeah.
Okay, so I have two comments, but first and foremost, I saw the parallels between when you talk class resentment, you're talking about the unconscious. I read Capitalist Realism, great book. Spoiler alert: Mark Fisher he committed suicide, right? I thought it was an interesting kind of dynamic of why he did it. But also in that book, he quotes one of the main things the highlights that I remember is that he quotes Deleuze and Guattari, and he says that capitalism is an illiterate system. Also, David Harvey in New Imperialism, he quotes them as well. So capitalism, the anti-intellectualism, is a result of capitalism because capitalism does not want you to be literate, right? And then the second thing was, you talked about how the colonization of the unconscious. I love that because that is what's happening, right? But I shared this with Helen. I found, I don't know if you're familiar with Aldous Huxley.
Of course.
So he was a psychologist, but he also did shrooms and all of that. He was into the psychedelics. And I want to quote, because this is the thing that I lean on when it comes to the colonization of the unconscious. He says, "It is difficult to speak of mental events except in similes drawn from the familiar universe of material things. A man may be said to consist of an old world of personal consciousness, and on the other side of a dividing ocean of a series of new worlds. These new worlds of a subconscious can never be colonized, are seldom thoroughly explored, and in many cases await even discovery. As in this earth, if you go to the antipodes of the self-conscious personality, you will encounter all sorts of creatures at least as odd as kangaroos. We do not, in either case, invent these creatures. They live, observe them. They exist out there in the mental equivalent of distant space. From in here, we can sometimes watch them as they go about their mysterious business." And this is going back to what I was talking about, the feminine. So there are aspects of our consciousness or the unconscious that can never be colonized. So the truth of the matter is, we can rest in the fact that that makes us winners. In other words, winners against the capitalist system. You just have to be able to go to the depths, or you have to be willing to go to the depths of your unconsciousness. Now that's the part that a lot of people do not want to do, because Carl Jung says that you cannot achieve greater consciousness without pain. And you have to go, that's why you need to feel. So pain is the process by which you expand your consciousness.
Absolutely. And just because you mentioned Huxley, I have to shout out A Brave New World, because if I hear someone talk about, oh, we live in 1984 again, I'm going to be like, no. 1984 was actually optimistic because it would assume that we wouldn't enjoy it. It would assume that we would all recognize what it was and fight against it. Brave New World is actually much more accurate, right? Because we're all in it and pretending like it's a good time, right? And we don't want to read, right? You don't have to stop us from thinking. We ain't thinking, right? We just want a little bit of pleasure, right? We want a little bit of fun. We don't want to have too much responsibility. You tell us what to do, right? But in 1984, there was like this thread of discontent, right? But I don't see that as really representative of what's going on. I see it much more as the world of a brave new world.
One more minute.
I love the presentation. I'm just thinking though, we're looking at the capitalist system in a very traditional way. What do you think that AI is going to do to the capitalist area?
Oh my gosh, Alicia Cloutier, Alicia, because I was actually, I told Alicia what I thought, and I was so.
Work is being dehumanized.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we're also being replaced. So this great theory that we have that we have to buy into the system and we keep it afloat, that's going out the door. So we're looking at old ways of approaching capitalism. What's going to happen going forward?
There's a lot, right? So there's this idea of techno-feudalism, which is that the old way of capitalism been gone. Like you talking about that? That's like so 4 years ago, right? It is already this new digital techno-feudalism situation where that's all completely digital, right? So there are people who are saying we've already reached that point. What Mark said, because he had no imagination and didn't know where we was going to be, he thought that the machines would liberate us, right? He thought that, don't laugh, Tony. He thought that, we would get to the point collectively when we would be like, oh my gosh, guys, we did it. Technology can do all the boring work, right? And we would let technology do it, and we would run off into the fields holding hands, hugging each other, right? And so if he could imagine AI, he would be like, okay, surely now you will stop and let the machines just fill out the forms, and you will actually go and write that novel eventually. Let the machine answer the emails, you go create, right? But we see that's not happening. Exactly. Yes. Unfortunately, yeah.
It's wild because we don't even have the technology, because like half of me is like, hey, thank God for the PLP. Because the power is gonna go out before any AI overlord can take place, right? Because the problem is
And we have to